It's not often the Colorado Mountain Club is able to bring our communities together from across the state. It's a really special thing, so thank you so much for being here. I know that you are all busy people. In fact, if you weren't here today, there's a pretty strong chance that you'd be out in the mountains sharing your passion to leading trips, teaching a class, maybe working behind the scenes to put it all together. So before we go into some nuts and bolts of the conference, I want to acknowledge all of you. Volunteers are the heartbeat of our organization. Every year, y'all lead over 205 courses, schools, and clinics, lead over 1,700 trips in Colorado and beyond. And all that adds up to 25,000 participant activity days. That is amazing. So thank you, volunteers. Behind the scenes too, we have folks working in our board of directors. We have a few folks from the board here today. Past President Matt Stevens. Current President Matt Stevens, past President Matt Biskin, and Vice President Jeff Flax. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. And we have many folks who serve on group councils, state councils as well. So if you are part of a council, please raise your hand and we'll put it together for you. Cool. Again, we're also celebrating volunteers here today and throughout the weekend. We want to call out a few volunteers that have been recognized this past year. So Linda Lawson, would you mind standing up? She is the recipient of the Carl Blaurock Silver Piton Volunteer of the Year 2018. And also Miss B. Slingsby, who is our Goody Gaskill Female Volunteer of the Year from last year as well too. B, are you here? She was here last night, but maybe she's sleeping in, I don't know.
Probably leading a trip.
Awesome, and for our final acknowledgments, I just want to thank our sponsors, Weston Snowboards, Camp Outdoors, and Osprey for helping us put this event together, for putting together those lovely swag bags for y'all, and some prizes from the raffle last night. We couldn't do it without you. Thanks, y'all. It's an exciting time for the Colorado Mountain Club. Earlier this year, we embarked on creating a new strategic plan that will guide us for the next 5 years. That plan will officially be released in the fall, but this conference reflects many of the values from that plan. So, I have some goals for you. You'll know you've had a successful volunteer leadership conference if, 1, collaboration. We need to continue working together as a club to move the club forward, change with the times. So, if today you find someone or organization you might like to work with even more, you'll know you've had a successful conference. Learning. Learning never stops. If you're a teacher, if you're a leader, it's a work in progress. So hopefully today we'll exchange some ideas from across the club, but also bring in some ideas from outside our club. Some may be kind of in the box, and some may be kind of out there, a little outside the box. So if you found one thing today or this weekend that you've learned that you could incorporate into your role as a volunteer, you'll know you've had a successful conference. And last but not least, community. As of last month, we have 6,800 members across the state. And so if you are able to connect with at least one new person, maybe even from a different group this weekend, you'll know that you've had a successful conference. Okay, let's welcome our first speaker, our keynote. Chris Warner is a leader in every sense of the word. He's led expeditions to some of the world's highest mountains. He's been a successful business person and entrepreneur, and he's shared leadership with universities, professional sports teams, and Fortune 500 companies. And today, he's here to share his passion for the mountains and leadership with us. Let's give a warm CMC welcome to Chris Warner.
Thanks, Doug. So, like a lot of you, I'm really just a dumb dirtbag climber. And I was sitting at my desk one day, and the phone rang, and it was the NSA, the National Security Agency. And they had a team in the field, and I had trained this team for 6 weeks on how to do high-angle rescue, high-angle, they were putting listening posts in crazy places like elevator shafts in Baghdad and like up on these ridges above Sarajevo. And I taught them how to use climbing techniques to do this. So the phone rings and it's the NSA and they're like, we need to patch you through to a team in the field. And these guys are in the background. You can hear their voices and you can hear guns being loaded, magazines being checked, people running and chasing around on this rooftop. They're on the rooftop of a Middle Eastern city in an office complex, and they had been putting in these listening devices, and somebody had seen them. And they thought that they were somebody robbing the building. And so these guys, these American 9 covert operators, run to the top of the building and they barricaded the doors. And every one of these guys was an expert in their field, like from small arms combat to hand-to-hand combat to all the electronics needed to do this job. But they were about to be killed by this enemy force. And this is about 16 or 17 years ago, so you can kind of imagine where we are, although I'm not allowed to say. So anyway, they're on the roof of the building, and if they are caught, they will be killed. And it certainly is going to be a gigantic incident for the United States, especially at that point we had a brand new president who was going to, this was going to be more than just egg on his face, right? It was going to be the death of 9 Americans. It would be a terrible, terrible way to start your presidency. And so they're trying to figure out how to get off the roof of this building. And I had taught them for 6 weeks on how to use all sorts of, to build Tyrolean traverses and to do hauling and all this other stuff. And I was like, do you guys have a grappling hook? And they did. And they literally were able to throw the grappling hook across this road, lasso another building, and build a zip line. And while the bad guys were coming up the stairs, they were zip lining from building to building and building, and they eventually escaped. When they got back to the United States, we got together to do an after-action review, right? This is obviously an intense situation, and so we wanted to break down what had happened. And what they came back with was, the most important thing you taught us in this 6 weeks was not how to tie knots, right? Although those knots were critically important, right? It wasn't just that you taught us how to use these tools, which were critically important, but the most important thing you taught us was how to behave in this incredibly stressful situation, right? Literally a life and death situation. And this was a group that really was under-resourced on the tool part, right? You can only carry so much climbing crap in these bags, if you're covert around these cities. And so they had only had 6 weeks of training in these techniques, but in the moment that mattered the most, they created an elegant solution to their problem, and everybody got out of there alive. And so it really was the behaviors of the group that drove the results. Following that experience, or really parallel to it, I was climbing on K2, and I'm going to tell you that story in a few minutes. This time on K2, we had the best of the best climbers in the world. Literally, it was like the A team, and the leader of the expedition had gone around and found people, and whether it was from France or Switzerland or from Australia or New Zealand, he got the best of the best and brought us together, and the team was completely dysfunctional. We had the worst behavior you could ever imagine, and the result was that nobody summited. So while I was climbing K2, training covert operators, the Wharton School of Business called. So does anybody here have an MBA or a business background? Probably most of us. So Wharton is considered one of the top 3 business schools in the world, and they were looking for ways to train, future business leaders to be better leaders. And we know, like everybody here in this room has experienced, has been a victim of the fact that we don't have enough good leaders in the world. Right? We see this all the time, whether it's in youth sports, politics, religion, business, it doesn't matter. So they were trying to figure out how to make their leaders better. So they asked me, a dumb climber, to come in. And I spent 16 years at the Wharton School of Business running leadership development expeditions, doing what you guys do all the time, taking people and putting them in these, mountaineering experiences so that the best in them could come out, so that they could see how a high performance team was built, so they could have a yardstick then to judge other groups that they might work with in the future. Well, those graduates would go off to places like Google and Charles Schwab and JP Morgan, all these companies, and they would get there and they would realize in the workplace, most teams were completely dysfunctional. And so they would call me up and say, hey, can you come in and help me get my team to be more functional? So suddenly I was in places like Google, right, and spending a lot of time there. And then parallel with this again was I had my own company. So I left the University of Colorado in 1987 to go be an outward bound instructor. And at one point along the line, I realized I wanted to just be a guide. And so I had $592 and I started my own business called Earth Checks. So Earth Checks, we grew into being the pretty much the industry, everyone has an opinion on this stuff, but it was an industry leader in the indoor climbing world. We also led over 200 international mountaineering expeditions. And then I had, when I left as CEO and sold the company to private equity, I actually had about 1,000 employees, and we were serving 2 million customers a year. So we had a deeply personal need to build better leaders. We had a gigantic business need to build better leaders, right? And I certainly had a personal need because I was going on these crazy trips to places like K2 and Makalu, et cetera. So what I want to walk you through here is a story, because I think we all recognize that story is one of the best ways to teach people lessons. And so in this story, you're going to see lots of lessons that you can relate directly to. Most of it is on the same theme, and the theme is that behaviors are the killer app to driving results. And I'm sure you're going to hear things in this that remind you of experiences you've had at work, certainly experiences that you've had in the mountains. And then after we've explored this theme, we're fully immersed into it, our minds are completely open to the possibilities. We're then going to look at the data behind great teams. But to get to great teams, we first have to plow through the bad teams. So we're going to go from bad teams to great teams, and then we're going to finally get to our team. And most of you filled out a survey tool, so we're going to bring that data into it. My hope in this whole thing is that everybody in this room, becomes a better version of themselves as a leader. I would imagine that most people in this room are leadership athletes, right? Like, you're here because you have demonstrated that you have, core competencies in leadership. And Gallup, which has surveyed hundreds of thousands of managers, has found that only 10% of people have a natural leadership ability. 8% have talents that can turn themselves into leaders, but they found that 82% of all leaders in America stink, right? So we are an elite group in this room because we're part of the 10%. What our job, though, to do, especially at this stage in our life, is to go from being leadership athlete to leadership coach, right? It's great that you know how to run fast and jump high, but it's more important now that you can teach somebody else how to run fast and jump high. And so the only way you can do that is if you go from being intuitively great at leadership to intellectually great at leadership. So my hope at the end is that you're going to walk out of here with some real intellectual tools that you could say, hey, this is what actually allows me to be a great leader. And if I apply these tools consistently because I now know them, then I can actually be a great leader, 97% of the times or 93% of the times. One of the things that I found, especially working with high performance teams, they are all desperate to get 0.1% better. So, maybe for some people in this room that are absolutely mind-blowingly amazing, you'll hopefully get at least 0.1% better. I've worked with amazing groups. I got to work with all the coaches of the Ravens when they won the Super Bowl. And you talk about a high-performance team. I mean, these guys were led by the single most charismatic person I've ever met, John Harbaugh. Every single person was intellectually invested in the whole process, and they were desperate to get 0.1% better. So I'm hoping that this is the same kind of audience. We'll go through the story. We're going to do an exercise together in which people are going to have to come together. So people sitting alone are going to move into the middle or at least join in little groups to do this exercise. And then we're going to go through this data-driven part of it when you guys can ask a ton of questions. And then hopefully everybody walks out of here, as I said, a much better version of themselves. So let's start on a peak called Everest. Has anybody here climbed Everest? Okay. Kind of surprising, right? Because there's been over 8,000 people on the summit of Everest now. Which for most of us, I know that I look around the audience, I see there's a lot of people that kind of grew up, my generation or maybe slightly older than I was. When we first started to hear the Everest story, especially when we think about 1963 with the Americans climbing Everest, or even when we were a little bit older, that story was intertwined with a couple of other important cultural events that were happening. So we had World War I and World War II, which taught us that human beings were terrible people, right? That there was these forces of evil in the world. And then we had situations like the first ascent of Everest in 1953, where we started to hear stories about, wow, human beings can actually pull together, they can dig deep inside themselves, and the best version of themselves can come out, and we can accomplish these amazing things. This is the theme, right, the storyline that John F. Kennedy used to drive us to the moon. And I was in kindergarten. I remember July 20th, 1969 very well, right? It was one of those formative moments of my life when man first walked on the moon. So these themes were really big, especially for those of us who, spent a lot of time in the 1960s. So let's talk about Everest for a second. We do know that the first 10 expeditions that went to Mount Everest failed, and 16 people died trying to get to the top. In 1952, the Nepali government opens Everest for the first time to attempt to get to the summit from the south side, and they give the permit to a Swiss team. 9 other expeditions had been British. Now there's a Swiss team. If you were a British climber whose so much of your identity was tied to getting to the summit of Mount Everest, you were bummed when they gave it to the Swiss. I don't know how many of you guys have been to Switzerland before versus England, but they have these things called mountains in Switzerland, right? So now they have the experts, right? Swiss mountain guides are going there, and they have a team size of 30 people, including this guy named Tenzing Norgay, who's now on his 5th expedition to Mount Everest. So Tenzing Norgay is the world's expert on Mount Everest, and he's going with these expert climbers, and they go really high. They actually go to within 600 feet of the summit on a route that had never been climbed before. So they were walking into the unknown towards the summit of Everest. For some reason, they're forced to turn around 600 feet from the top. Maybe it was too late in the day. We know that their equipment was primitive. It was heavy. You can imagine how exhausted they were, etc. Well, when the Swiss failed, the Brits rejoiced. And so the next year, the Brits show up, and they decide that they're going to bring 50% more stuff. So they bring 50% more ropes, 50% more oxygen, 50% more people. So instead of 30, it's 45 people. And on that team, their killer app is Tenzing Norgay, now on his 6th expedition to Mount Everest, and he knows the way to within 600 feet of the summit. So all they have to do is go 600 feet into the unknown, and luckily for them, they're able to get there. So they get the picture. This is a famous picture that Edmund Hillary took of Tenzing Norgay on the top. This picture, of course, is iconic. And if you were part of the marketing machine for Great Britain, you turned this into everything possible to tell the world how great our nation is. And so they had the supreme adventure of their time when they conquested Mount Everest. They built really this whole imaginary machine about how important this ascent was to all of us. And so many people in the world felt this experience as being part of the rebuilding of the human species. Well, when we look back, because we have hindsight here, we could see how they got there. And we see that the method that they used on Mount Everest is the same method that they use today. Desperate to get to the top, they hired a guy to run the expedition who had been a colonel in World War II, and he came with military practices and applied this engineering thinking to Mount Everest. And if you think about it too, it's the 1950s. What are all the big businesses in the world, right? It's GM, it's GE, it's Westinghouse. It's businesses run by engineers who are trying to make things lighter, cheaper, faster, right, to try to gain market share. So it was an engineering expedition. And they brought with them over 30,000 feet of rope. If they came across an obstacle, they propped a ladder up against Mount Everest. So people don't climb Mount Everest today. They climb ladders on Mount Everest today. Right? This 30,000 feet of rope technique is still used. In fact, it's probably even more now because they're starting to put multiple lanes up and down Mount Everest. So soon there'll be 60,000 feet of rope there. Well, they use tools to drive results. And that, as we know, during that time period, that's how everybody got results. They had, engineers designing tools that got them the market share that they wanted. Well, fast forward to 1996, and I'm sure everybody in this story knows, or in this room knows this story. So we have now the beginning of the commercial operators on Mount Everest. And there's a belief that there is only room in the market for one company. But 2 CEOs show up there, right? Like they're the Silicon Valley guys of America or of world guiding, and they're going to compete to get the most people to the summit of Mount Everest. And if they win this race, if I get 10 and you get 9, it shows the world that I'm better than you. You're out of business. I've captured 100% of the market share, and then I have a way to actually, buy more than pizza for my family. So they push their way to the summit, competing against each other, both teams going on the very same day. And as you guys know this story, the CEOs neglect to collect the data they need to make smart decisions for their customers. And so 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a gigantic cumulus cloud is building up on the Kangshung face, the eastern side of Mount Everest. By the time the afternoon unfolds, this giant cumulus cloud engulfs the mountain. But remember, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. This is already a violation of the basic rules of guiding Mount Everest. I guided Mount Everest 3 different times. Our story was that we could only carry, back then, now I think it's a little bit different, but we only carried 18 hours worth of oxygen. And so if it took you 10 hours to get to the top, you had 8 hours to get down with oxygen, right? In fact, we know that if it takes you 13 hours to get to the summit of Mount Everest, you're 5 times more likely to die than if it takes you 11 hours. Because 13 or 18 hours minus 13 hours is 5 hours to get back down. We also know that most people die on the descent of Mount Everest. So these guys are pushing to the summit, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. They should have already turned around. Now this gigantic cumulus cloud is swirling around. It engulfs the mountain. People are lost in the whiteout. The CEOs become separated from their teams. They don't know what's happening, right? There's intermittent radio calls, etc. As you guys know, by the time this day is over, 5 people would be dead, including the 2 CEOs. By the time the week was over, 11 people would be dead on Mount Everest. Well, this story captures the imagination of everybody. We have the Into Thin Air book, we have the Climb book, we have the movies that are made about it. It's the front page of most newspaper articles, etc. And it is a gripping story what's happening on Mount Everest. And it's a gripping story for those of us who are in the business of taking people to the summit of Mount Everest, because we realize that we are all out of business. How many of you have killed clients? I haven't, but just saying, right? It is actually considered bad business practices in most businesses to kill your client. The exception to that rule is Mount Everest. For some absolutely insane reason, we killed all those people, and the very next year we had more business than we could ever imagine happening. And you guys know the story from there and that. Well, we decided, though, as guys, that we had a responsibility. We had a responsibility to our shareholders in getting repeat business. So let's try not to kill too many folks, right? So we looked at the ways that you can die on Mount Everest. There's 19 ways that people traditionally die when trying to climb Mount Everest. And if we could study these, we could try to figure out how to prevent these deaths. Well, it ends up the top 4 reasons why people die on Mount Everest is because of human error. People go to the mountains and kill themselves. The mountain does not kill them. It's not until you get down 15, the 15th biggest reason or the 12th biggest reason that you do find things like avalanches and rockfall, etc. But the top 4 reasons are human error. And in general, what happens is people stop moving. So if you are completely exhausted and you stop, like this man here called Green Boots, if you lay down like Green Boots, and it's 40 below zero, when you become unconscious at 40 below zero, the human body freezes solid in 6 hours. So Green Boots lays down and can never stand up. There's a man called the Waving Man at 28,500 feet on the North Ridge of Everest. He sat down on a rock like this. How many of you guys ever been to like a football game in December? And you know how the cold comes through, right through that concrete, right up through your legs, through your butt, right? Your hands are freezing. Your core, of course, is the last place that gets cold. So he literally froze in this position in his path to death. We call him the Waving Man because on the way to the summit, he sees me pointing there. On the way back, he's ready to high-five you. That man will be there forever because there's no bacteria on Everest at that altitude. So you are just a bluer version of yourself the day you died, right? You could be, it's like, how many of you guys have a bag of peas in the back of your freezer? Right? You could take those peas and eat them tonight if you wanted to. They could be 47 years old and they will taste the same tonight as they did then. So these dead bodies, when I got into the North Ridge of Everest, we had 8 dead bodies that you stepped over or around on your way to the summit. Well, our job as guides was to tell people, don't die. If you see one of these 19 ways that you could die, turn around. Well, what we ended up doing was we added a whole bunch of new techniques. We improved some of our tools, and we got amazing, amazing results. So this is my group on the summit of Mount Everest in 2001. somebody in this picture is the 2,000th person to reach the summit of Mount Everest. This was actually, at the time, the record summit day for Mount Everest. From the north side and the south side, we had a combined total of 89 people reach the summit. Okay? So this is our gang on the top here. And in the first 50 years of attempting Mount Everest, 2 people got to the top. The next 48 years, 1,998 more people got to the top. And then since then, in the last 18 years, we've had 6,000 plus more people show up here, right? So this picture becomes the cover photo of this story, the Everest mess. And the mess they were talking about, to tell you the truth, was not discarded oxygen bottles, poop, all, tent shards, etc. It was actually the behaviors that were happening up there. People were sneaking into each other's tents and using their sleeping bags and their oxygen and their food as opposed instead of carrying their own stuff up to there, right? We had people faking, because who is this person? Now look how many red down suits are on the top, right? So you would get a picture like this and pretend it was you at the top. You never had to get past Camp 2 and you suddenly had a summit picture of yourself. So these kinds of stories were pervading the kind of the zeitgeist that was happening on Mount Everest, and the stories get way worse than that as time goes on. So now let's fast forward a bunch of years. So you guys might remember this picture from 2012. In 2012, this picture was famous because it was a year in which over 250 people reached the summit of Mount Everest on the same day. This is that same group as they're leaving Camp 3 to go towards Camp 4 and then on to the summit. Somewhere in this group is a British woman who at 19 years old, alongside of her father, is trying to be the youngest British person to reach the summit of Mount Everest. So look, it's the Facebook era, etc. This is a cool thing, right? To be the youngest person to reach the summit of Mount Everest from Great Britain. So she tells a story. She's interviewed by a number of reporters, and she tells a story about what it was like to go to the summit and the horrors that she faced along the way. And the reporter asked her, well, was there anything that happened along the way that was really challenging for you, that really challenged your thinking? And she goes, yeah. She starts talking about the dead bodies, freshly death, right? And there's also a couple who are still alive. As we passed, he raised his arm and looked at us. He didn't know anyone was there. He was almost dead. He was dead when we came back down. So how many of you, if you're climbing with your daughter, want your daughter to step over a dying person who's raising his arm and looking at you? How many of you would stop and help? Right? Yeah, hopefully all of us would. But there's some kind of weird mental game that's played up at these altitudes, that's played with these people, that's played with these crowds of people that make them think that it's okay to walk past somebody who raises his arm and is looking at you, right? Now, granted, she's 19, right? She's with her father. Maybe it was more her father's responsibility than hers. Maybe it was the guide's responsibility, not just the father's responsibility. But out of 250 people going to the summit, could they have saved this person's life? They didn't even try. So they decided that it was more important to reach the peak than to get the point. And I would imagine all of us in the room share the same philosophy, that it's more important, don't reach the peak, but miss the point. Right? That we do these things because we're trying to become a better version of ourselves, right? It's more important that our values, our core values are increased, that we're trained to be able to handle bigger adversities in life than it is just to tag a summit. Well, this story on Everest doesn't change. We have this picture from this year, right? When over 100 more people are trying to go to the summit this day than was in 2012. Can you imagine what it was like to be on the top? Well, what about this guy from Golden, right? Here's a doctor in Golden, and this is a story about his experience up there. You guys are going to have a class later today in the overcrowding situation in the Colorado Mountains. I think it's critical that you watch what's happening on Mount Everest to see what's going to happen on Mount Elbert, right? Okay. Well, for those of us who had a romantic vision of climbing Mount Everest, right, born out of this crazy idea of the 1950s and 60s that human beings could overcome gigantic obstacles so that we could reach our highest potential, it was easy to walk away from Mount Everest. So I decided I'm going to go to the next challenging place, that most people will never want to go to, and that's K2. So you guys know the difference between Everest and K2? So in our sport, we have the death to summit ratio, right? They have par in golf, right? So on Everest, there's over 8,000 people who have been on the summit. The death to summit ratio is 3%. On K2, I think it's still under 400 people have ever been to the summit of K2. The death to summit ratio is about 30%. So if you're going to go to the most dangerous, arguably most dangerous mountain in the world, who would you want to go with? Well, I felt unqualified. I had guided Everest. I actually was the first American to ever solo an 8,000 meter peak. Right? I soloed the south face of Shishapangma in a 34-hour nonstop up and down. And if you've seen the south face of Shishapangma, it's pretty badass, right? So I had climbed in the Yosemite Valley. I'd done all this other stuff. I didn't think I was capable of getting to the summit of K2. But I got a phone call from a guy named Henry Todd. And Henry Todd had led 30 expeditions to 8,000 meter peaks. And he said he's putting together the dream team. Just like Noah, he went to New Zealand and found the 2 best climbers. He went to France to find the 2 best climbers. And he came to the United States and he said, I want you on my team. And so I jumped at the chance. Well, we travel to Islamabad, Pakistan. We take the drive up to the Karakoram Kaiway. We start the 8-day walk into base camp. And along the way, I could start to realize that there's some really nice people in this team, but the vast majority of the best climbers in the world are prima donnas. They are the most selfish people I've ever met. And we realized that we couldn't organize, a picnic in Central Park, never mind an attempt to the summit of K2. And the expedition changed dramatically for me on my birthday. And we are at the bottom of the peak, strapping on our crampons, when somebody starts to yell, and through the sky above us is a body. And he is grasping at the air to try to save his life. And he travels through more than 1,000 feet of thin air and smashes into the side of K2. There's a gigantic explosion of blood. His body bounces out another 500 feet, there's another explosion, 200 feet, another explosion, 300 feet, another explosion, and he comes to a stop 500 feet away from 12 of the best climbers in the world, and his body literally lands on the route, right next to footprints. 2 of us grab our gear and race towards this man. We know he's dead. There's no way the human being could have survived this fall. 10 people sit down. The 2 of us who go up are 2 Americans. There's a guy named Rod Richardson and myself. Rod Richardson had been 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. He had been shot 4 times in his back by, he was working in Lebanon. He was a U.S. Marine Corps recon lieutenant colonel. So he's the baddest asses of all the baddest asses. So he leaves this expedition to become Hamid Karzai's head of security. Do you guys know Blackwater, the organization that had the private army in El Anbar province? He ran Blackwater's El Anbar province army. Well, he and I raced to the body. And 5 feet away from him, we stop in our tracks. It is the single most traumatized human being I've ever seen. His hips have been pulverized, and his legs are up behind his back, and his feet are coming out by his shoulders. And the source of all the bleeding was the back of his skull, which had hit a rock and was completely impacted in. And the pieces of his face were all, because the skull no longer meshed with the skin, everything had shifted a little bit. And the skin had been drained of all its blood to turn a gray color, which made his teeth seem to glow in the dark. His eyes were crooked, his nose was sliding off the side of his face. And we had to rebuild him. But we had one more important task first, and that was to send as much love into his soul as we possibly could. How many of you have been there with somebody died, right? How many of you have been there with somebody who's just been born? So when we're watching our child being born, it is an overwhelming feeling of love in that room. It is the universal miracle. And everybody knows to do the same thing. It's just overwhelming the amount of love. And so, but with death, right, there's fear, there's anxiety, there's, a lack of, we have no control over the situation. And so we knew that this soul should only feel love when it leaves this world. It should not feel our fear and our anxiety. And so we calmed ourselves by holding hands. So me and the most badass Marine you've ever met, we literally held hands for a couple of minutes, got our emotions together, and then put our hands on this man's body. The first time I'd ever felt a person die was in Peru on a climbing expedition, not a partner of mine, but when I was trying to give him CPR, I could feel his soul going through my body. And he taught me in that moment, he didn't live, but he taught me that I was supposed to send love. And so here we were on K2, two grown men holding hands, holding onto his body, trying to force as much love as we possibly could into him. We then had to repackage him. He was not a member of our team, but his team was above, and they were trying to come down to him. And if they saw him in that state, they would never forgive themselves. They would have survivor guilt. They didn't cause his death, but it was so traumatic. So we packaged him up. The first thing I had to do is I had to grab him under the shoulder blades, hold him up like this so Rod could pull out one leg and pull out the other leg. We lower him down. My whole Gore-Tex jacket is covered now in brain matter. And so we then take a down jacket, we take a sleeping pad, we tie him as best we possibly can, and then we lower him down the slope to where these other 10 climbers are. And as we get them all there, gather around, we start barking orders. We're pretty pissed at this point, actually, that they hadn't come to help. And so we need a plastic garbage bag to cover the top because the blood keeps coming out. We need tent flies to wrap him up. Eventually, we get him in this mummy shape, and we want to carry him the 3.5 miles back to base camp. But this is a trip across glaciers through an ice fall. There's no way that 12 of us could carry a 200-pound person through this safely. So we get on the radios to base camp, send everybody, send the cook boys, right? We need everybody in base camp, which is about 60 people, to come to make this a safe extraction of this body back to base camp. While we're waiting for them all to show up, we're all gathered in a circle, and the body's laying there next to us, and suddenly I have a massive anxiety attack. I am being stabbed in the stomach 1,000 times, and I bend over like this, and the tears are coming to my eyes, and I look at everybody. I said, you know what? I quit. Today's my birthday, and I'm going home, and I start bawling, crying. So I think it was the first time anybody ever cried in mountaineering, and so here I was, like losing it. And I was so upset I could not actually help carry the body down. So I start walking back by myself, and the people are racing up from base camp, and they see me, and I am covered in blood. And they all start crying the second they see me. I could not shut my eyes for days. Every time I did, I could see this man's face. But I then walked the 85 miles back to the road, and then I took the road for the 3 days back to Islamabad, and I took the plane for 2 days back to the United States. So I had about 10 days of pouting ahead of me. And by the time I got back to the United States, I had worked through some of my grief, and I had become more determined than ever to go back to K2. Give me 1 second. That year, 2 people died on K2, and nobody summited. When you die on K2, it's rare that your body actually falls down and lands on a trail. Almost always, we never find you. And so to create some sense of closure, we'll take the plate that you've been eating off of for the last 2 months, we scrape away the mashed potatoes and gravy, we take a piton, we chisel your name into this, and we take these plates to the Gilkey Memorial, and then we strap them on here. So when I got there that season, there were 63 plates. When I left, there were 65 plates. Of the 12 people that were on that team, 6 people are now dead, sadly including Rod Richardson. He, when he was working in Iraq, he came up to a checkpoint, and a group of Al-Qaeda or whatever they were, dressed as police, opened fire on his vehicle, and they killed Rod. So, well, I got a chance to come back to K2. This time I was leading the expedition. The first time I went on the expedition, all of the employees of the team, right, all the team members had been hired based upon their resumes, and they had the best resumes ever. This time I wanted to hire people based on 2 main characteristics. Number 1, of course, you have to have the basic climbing skills needed to get up and down K2. But most importantly, could I trust you in a life or death situation? And so these are my climbing partners. This is a guy named Don Bowie. Don Bowie was a mountain rescue expert, a paramedic, right? We had met climbing in Pakistan a couple years earlier. This is Bruce Norman. Bruce Norman is the smartest man I've ever met. He now has 2 Palme d'Ors, if you know what those are, right? It's the award for the most bold alpine climbs of the year. He is a theoretical physicist. He teaches physics in Beijing. He speaks 9 languages, all the easy ones like Korean, Russian, a couple of Chinese dialects. He does speak them all with a Scottish accent, so nobody's ever understood a damn word he's ever said. So this is a guy named Joel Shalowitz who's going to sit in base camp. He's going to be our base camp manager, getting the weather forecast, etc. And when you get to K2 base camp, you put your camp up at 17,200 feet. You have 11,000 feet to go to get to the summit. You have to build a series of camps. And so you go to camp 1, and you have to carry, there's 3 of us climbing. We probably have about 700 or 800 pounds of gear that have to be moved up the mountain. So you carry all 700, 800 pounds up to camp 1, then you carry 600 up to camp 2, etc. And you're laying ropes as you go along the way. We had gotten there early, so we were one of the first teams on the mountain that season. So we're out there, and we're going to work every single day. It doesn't matter if it's 20 below zero, if the wind is blowing 40 miles an hour, if it's snowing, whatever, you go to work. And so we build these series of camps. We have no Sherpas with us. We have no bottled oxygen. We're trying to climb it in the purest style possible. We eventually get all the way up to Camp 3, which is about 24,000 feet or so. So we're 4,000 feet from the summit. In a perfect world, we would go from 3 to 4, put it here, and then we want to get there early in the day because the average summit day on K2 is 21 hours round trip, Camp 4 to Camp 4. So you want to get to Camp 4, hopefully by noon, so you can rest for 5 or 6 or 7 hours. You got to melt snow for water before you go to the summit. So, although when we leave Camp 3 to go to Camp 4, the snow is past waist deep, and we only make 100 feet an hour, right? So there's no possible way that 3 people can put the route into Camp 4. So we come back down. And we have failed. We've spent 6 weeks on the mountain trying to get to the top, and we have failed in our attempt. And so as we get back to base camp, which has now been filling up with different teams, everybody's a little panicked because the strategy for the other teams were, let the Americans go first, let the Americans put the rope in, let the Americans take the maximum amount of risk, and then after they've done all the risky stuff, we'll race to the summit following in their footsteps so that we can get the maximum amount of reward with the least amount of effort. So that's their strategy. And when we come back having failed, they are very angry at us. And so a decision is made to pull all the leaders of these expeditions together to have a conversation, right? We need a new strategy. So we have the killer app, which is Bruce, because there's a Korean group, there's a Russian group, right? There's all these other people. There's a crazy lone Iranian climber. There's all these other people that are like, well, bring Bruce in, and he will, we're going to give the Vince Lombardi speech. Bruce is going to translate it to everybody, and then we're going to have complete unification of effort, and we're all going to be able to summit this thing. The strategy is that we're going to leave the next morning, and we're all going to go to Camp 1 together. 25 of us. Remember, it's snowing, so the trail gets filled in. So if 25 of us leave together, maybe 20 will make it to Camp 1, and then 18 to Camp 2, and 12 to Camp 3, and 6 to Camp 4, and 1 to the summit. Are you willing, to sacrifice your team, literally including your own life, to get somebody from another team to the summit? And we're sitting in a circle. Have you guys ever sit in a circular conversation? Everyone's looking at each other. You have to tell the leader of that conversation what they want to hear, right? Whether you believe it or not. And so they're saying, oh my God, you're absolutely right. We will make the sacrifice. It doesn't matter for the glory of mankind. It doesn't matter if it's the Korean guy who gets to the summit and I fail as a Russian, right? So they're all saying the right thing. And so we get ready. We're going to leave at 5:30 in the morning to push together the summit. Well, here we are headed to the summit. And the first thing you're going to notice is that the Russians, the Koreans, the Italians, etc., everybody else rolled over and went back to bed.
All right, ready to get our butts whooped again?
Yep, ready to step on the beast.
Here we go, is it first step? Pretty nice up there, huh?
Yeah.
Well, here we are back on our way up K2. We're below Camp 1. And sure enough, it's snowing and blowing on us again. This mountain loves to torture us. It's really never given us the easy way out.
Beautiful
Camp 1 again. God.
We got up this morning and we looked up onto the Black Pyramid towards Camp 2. There was just a number of clouds ripping across the face. We were alone, there's no one else with us. And so we kind of talked to each other and we all decided, let's just go for it.
This is the funnel right here. This is probably the worst place to be in conditions like this. I can only go through this section one at a time. It's just too dangerous. It's definitely the coldest, hardest day so far going up to Camp 3.
Here we are at 22,000 feet and the weather's just not cooperating at all. Don is doing a great job of breaking trail for us. Days like this really fill you with doubt. Snow conditions are just horrendous. And looked like the wind died about an hour and a half ago. It's one of those days when you wish you took up golf instead of mountaineering. Alright, we'll just find Camp 3 somehow. And then probably 4 hours before we're ready to roll our sleep bags over.
We're at Camp 3. I'll tell you, it took us about 2.5 hours to ascend that last 100 meters or so. Without exaggeration, you couldn't touch bottom. And but we did get here. We were all comfortable. We're boiling water, and we'll head for Camp 4 tomorrow.
So we're back at the same place that we failed before. And remember, we thought we were going to have, 15 or 20 super strong, well-rested people helping us to get to the next stage. But they were nowhere to be seen. And we were filming our show for NBC. And we actually were nominated for 6 Emmys. I don't know. How many of you have been to the Emmys? It's a great party. You should go. Yeah. The Italians were filming it for Rai 2, one of their stations. And so they have an amazing scene in their film where they're inside the tent at Camp 1 and the tent is getting shaken back and forth by the winds and they're holding onto the tent poles. And the guy in the tent is talking by radio to the producers back in base camp. And they say to him, it's impossible to go anywhere. It is terrible the weather. And the guy in base camp goes, yes, but the Americans have just made Camp 3. And so, anyway, they are now panicked, right? So the Russians, the Koreans, the Italians, the lone Iranian climber are all down at Camp 1 or head to Camp 2. They hear we're here. They push like demons to try to catch us, right? Because they know they need to be attached to our train or engine to get their little cabooses to the summit. So here we are now climbing above Camp 3. This is the one spot where the snow is not waist deep, believe me. So, and if you guys have ever experienced, I'm sure you've experienced this, right? So down below us, there's this raging storm. You might have seen this been on a plane where you take off from the runway and you're up, you go through the clouds, or maybe this happened to you on Mount Elbert or something. And so down there's a storm. Down here in the bottom corner, maybe you could see tents starting to pop up. So that's the other teams that are showing up, right, to try to catch up to us. And we've been laying ropes and trying to go up, and you can see these massive backpacks that we have. We have over 3,000 feet of rope that we're carrying with all the pickets and ice screws and everything to secure the way up to Camp 4 and onto the summit. And so at some point in the day, a Portuguese climber catches us, actually two of them, and the Portuguese climber and his porter, Pakistani porter, they want they want to get to the summit. They're trying to get up to us, and so they followed our footsteps up. And this Portuguese climber, if you read any of the books he's written about himself, you'll notice on every third page he reminds you that he is the greatest mountaineer of all time. So we are psyched because the greatest mountaineer of all time has caught up to us. And we're like, Zhao, why don't you go first? He's like, yes, let me show you how it's done. You people are so slow. And he goes 10 feet. And he turns around and goes, this is impossible. Like, we're never going to make it. And the sad part is he's right. And so 500 feet away from Camp 3, we put in Camp 3.5. It's the Portuguese climber and his high-altitude porter, Don, Bruce, and I. The next morning, we go back up, and then now other people catch us. And out of the roughly 25 people headed to Camp 4 that day, 10 of us go out front. And the plan was, you go 10 steps and step aside, the next guy goes 10 steps and step aside, and every 100 feet you're back in the front for 10 steps. So 10 of us are doing this rotation at the front while 15 people are cheering us on from behind. We make it to Camp 4. This is the death zone. You guys have all heard this term before, 26,400 feet or so. Look how warm it is in the death zone. Nobody's wearing gloves, right? It's not a breath of air. You could have a picnic in the death zone. And so we get out to tents and stuff. We have all the gear, the ropes, the pitons, everything that's required to get to the summit. We had a strategy session in base camp, and the strategy was that the Korean team was going to leave high camp first, right? They are going to take the first 1,000 feet of rope up on this section here. It is no steeper than a blue ski run, that part of K2. They have 5 Nepali Sherpas, roughly 5 climbers at this point have made it this high. They all have bottled oxygen. The leader of that expedition is a Sherpa named Nima Nuru Sherpa, and he had been to the summit of Mount Everest 6 times, and he's being paid the princely sum of $25 a day to guide the Koreans to the summit of K2. And so Nima organizes his Sherpas to take the first 1,000 feet of rope. This section here is pretty damn tricky. And so Bruce, Don, and I will lead through that section. And then the last 1,000 feet is up here. This is going to be done by the 4 Russians who've made it, who all have bottled oxygen. One of those Russians is named Roman, and Roman at 30-something years old has had all of his teeth removed and these golden crowns put in. So he looks like the Jaws character from that James Bond movie. And I mean, I never saw the guy smile. I heard him grunt a few times, right? So anyway, they got Roman leading the Russians, right? And that's how we're gonna make it work. The best way for efficiency is if we all give the Koreans a 1 hour head start, right? Because they got to tie knots and uncoil ropes and stuff like that. And then if we time it right, we should get to where they're running out of rope at about the same time if we just, a nice continuous path of motion. So here we are heading to the summit. Can you turn it up a little bit, Jax?
Okay, you have a good trip, over.
I don't know if you can see anything up there. A couple of lights. They're in the bottleneck. And some Koreans, some Russians.
He said that the Koreans, it seemed, were going to head out at 11, and that they were going to head out at 12, but it sounded like everybody's backed up, so they're about an hour 20 behind where they thought they were, but it sounds like they're rearing to go. So the night and the summit push has begun.
Pretty dramatic so far. The Korean team was ahead of us. They were all on oxygen, and one of their Sherpas fell down the south face to his death. And I don't think we'll ever find his body. It's gonna be interesting to see what happens.
You guys just catch that? So it's right before this picture is taken. It's just before sunrise, or right at sunrise, basically. And Nima Nuru Sherpa, the guy who had been to the summit of Mount Everest 6 times, is walking in the footprints beside the rope, but not clipped into it. He loses his balance and he starts to slide, and the fall line goes like this, and this looks pretty, it's not steep. And we think for certain he's going to just stop himself and he's going to brush himself off, you know, whatever, laugh at himself and climb back up to us. But in that one-piece down suit, man, there's less friction than we thought, and he goes shooting off the edge. And we watch his body launch out into the beginning of an 8,000-foot fall and then disappear in the darkness. Everybody's gripped. So you have people stopping the prey, small groups are gathering together, trying to figure out what to do next. And I'm near the top, and I hear this young Sherpa scream for help. And he just watched his mentor, his friend, fall to his death. And he's so gripped, he can't remember how to tie a knot. So he's got the end of the rope, and he's got an anchor, and he is frozen. And he's yelling, help, help, help. And I just take off. I race up to him. I secure the rope for him so he can start his descent. And, everyone's questioning whether they should go to the summit or not. And I get on the radio to Bruce and Don, and I'm like, are you guys willing to keep pushing? You know, it's the perfect summit day, right? Look, there's not a single cloud in the sky. You can see a little bit of wind blowing off the side here, but this is a gorgeous summit day on K2. And so we decide we're going to continue to push. I have 600 feet of rope in my pack, so I take off and I start leading up. This is where Nima Nur Sherpa has fallen down this face here, right? So that's where the rope ends. I take the rope to there and run out of rope. And I get on the radio to Bruce. Remember, Bruce speaks 9 languages. I'm like, Bruce, find that Roman guy and send him up right now. And so this Roman dude, sucking bottled oxygen, so he sounds like Darth Vader, comes charging up, Roman with the golden teeth. I'm like, tie a piece of rope. I'm like, go, Roman, go. And so Roman takes the rope around across the bottleneck, the hardest part, and opens it up for the rest of us to go to the summit. So these are the Russians standing next to me.
Base camp.
Base camp copy, over.
The slope that they're on right now, the famed 45 or 55 or 65 degree bottleneck traverse slope, is in fact freaking steep. And you can see it from here, and Chris is on it right now, or at the black base there anyways.
Unbelievable. Considering how hard we've been working, this is a big mountain.
Hey, Mason, can you read me, over?
Yes, loud and clear, Chris.
Okay, we're turning the corner on the traverse.
Yeah, we got another 3, maybe 350 to go.
Here comes down the summit of K2. Awesome job, Don.
The whole base camp, you hear just applause erupting in every different camp, and we're all so excited for you. Over.
Very, very hard summer, these conditions. We either had deep snow or foolproof ice.
Oh, it's one of the hardest summits I've ever had. Oh, yeah? I think I only specialize in hard ones.
We left out one, so that's 15 and a half hours for the summit. I think I just pray that we can make it back safely. There's a long way before we hit the fixed lines. Over.
So do you guys catch the math on that? We left at 1 and it's 15 and a half hours to the summit. So we were terribly slowed by the difficulty, by Nima's death, etc. And so now it's 5:30, we're on the top of the peak. And the math doesn't work for the people with oxygen, right? They have 18 hours of oxygen. The Russians, the Koreans, they tag the summit and they take off as fast as they can. Well, we're on the top with all the leftovers, the misfit toys. This is Daniele Nardi. Daniele Nardi is the leader of the Italian expedition to K2, 4 men. They are the most handsome men I've ever seen on an expedition. They spend their days in base camp washing their hair and drinking espressos, right? So they have, all of the patches, the sharpest and shiniest crampons, right? Daniele, where's your team? I don't know, Chris. They're not as strong as I am. Take my picture. So I take his picture. He's like, film me for Italian television. And so I film him for Italian television. And so he marches across the summer. But Daniele, you're the leader of the expedition and you don't know where your teammates are? Yes. I'm like, okay. When have you seen them last? This morning. And so he has been climbing for 15 hours without any idea, right? I'm like, do you talk to them by the radio? He goes, no, we don't like each other that much. We hardly ever talk. And for him, this is an amazing accomplishment because he's the only Italian on the summit, so he must be the strongest, best-looking member of the team. And so, we have him on the summit. We have this guy, well, you see it, here he is taking this picture with his selfie stick, right? This guy shows up. We're like, who are you? He's like, I am Libor from Czech Republic. I'm like, where did you come from? Libor and his friends were climbing the other side of K2. They saw our lights in the middle of the night. They traverse across. They follow in our footsteps. 5 guys leave high camp. Libor is the only one to make the summit. Libor, like, how are you doing? He's like, I feel terrible. And he looks at Bruce and Don and starts to vomit. So he's sick, a sick Czech climber on the summit of K2. We have the proud Italian, and kneeling down next to him is the lone Iranian. This guy had looked like, I think he had hitchhiked from Tehran to Islamabad, got on the Greyhound bus. He looks like along the way he found a down suit, right? And so this little puppy, Iranian guy chases us all to the summit, and he's on the top. And we're like, oh my God, how are we going to get these people down? Like, I am a guide first and foremost, right? As a guide, you never leave the weak behind, right? This is just ingrained in your brain. And what we know from guiding is the strongest person always needs to be the highest person on the mountain. Because on the way up, the guide is first. On the way down, the guide is last. Because if a problem happens at 8,000 meters and that problem is 100 feet above you, it might take an hour to get there. Most people stop breathing in that time period, right? So you have to be able to descend to the problem quickly because it's too hard to climb to the problem. And so we gather the misfit toys together. It's 5:30 at night. The sun is starting to set on K2. As we enter the shadowed side of the mountain, it gets bitterly cold. And so we have these guys, we're connecting them to the rope. We have 3,000 feet of rope that we have to descend, right, to head towards Camp 4. As we're descending the ropes, we come across 2 more Italians still coming up. The Italian leader blazes past them without ever saying anything to them. We stop them. Like, are you people crazy? Like, it is going to be 6 o'clock by the time we're in the summer. Like, do you need anything? Like, do you need water? Do you need gloves? Do you need anything? No, we are great. We are, Italian mountain guides, right? And one guy was on his 10th expedition to 10th summit of an 8,000 meter peak, and the other guy had already been on K2 once before and failed in a year where all the rest of his teammates had succeeded, so he's feeling particularly terrible about himself. The 4th Italian guy had turned around at 10 o'clock in the morning and headed back down and is waiting at the highest camp. So this is a film of the Italians. This guy in yellow is one of those Italians who's still climbing at 5:30 at night, but this is him at 10 o'clock in the morning. So you could see he should have turned back at 10 o'clock in the morning. The reason he's so far behind everybody is he's exhausted. So these are the leaders. The producers, you should turn this off. This is them hearing that Daniele Nardi has reached the summit of K2. So their TV show is a success. They're psyched. And here's our movie of the proud leader walking across the summit of K2. Look how strong he is.
Mario, campo base, basso. Mario, campo base, basso.
Is there been any sights on Mario? Over. Yes, we've seen Mario. He's behind us, but they happen. Daniele is the only person who doesn't seem to be concerned about him.
Non ho capito bene, però.
Located. Over.
Mario rispetto a loro era 15 minuti, 30 minuti di ritardo.
So because they're not communicating with each other, they rely on us to give them updates.
You are with Mario?
Yes.
Where?
Mario's going to the summit.
He's going to the summit? You are... How many time?
Maybe 1 hour. Stefano's with him.
Stefano è con Mario.
Even if he's close to the top, it's not too late. That becomes dangerous.
Yes. Really dangerous.
Mario, campo base, basso. Ricambio.
Ti sentiamo, dove sei, Basso?
Sono in 20 campo 2.
So Mario radios in the first time when he's on the summit of K2.
Sei un adorabile pazzo, Mario, sei un adorabile
And they're
pazzo,
saying,
sei
descend
tantissimo.
fast, go
Sei
now,
adesso,
now.
pazzo.
They know at this late hour of the day what the consequence likely is. And he tells them that Stefano's also made the summit.
C'è Claudio che è scoppiato a piangere, pazzo.
This is Stefano walking down from the top.
Me lo fai morire questo ragazzo qua, Mario, passo.
Well, we get back to, or we're heading down the 3,000 feet of rope. We get to the end of the fixed line. It's now a walk back to camp. And the Czech climber is laying face down in the snow, and we roll him over. And all he could say to us is, I'm dying, I'm dying, I'm dying. And we're like, we don't know where his team is. We don't know where their tent is. They've come up the other side of the mountain. And so we know we have to take him with us. And so Don and I put him over our shoulders, and we drag him for over an hour back to the highest tent. We send Bruce ahead to start getting things ready. We get him into the tent. It's freezing cold. It's 20 below zero. It takes 10 minutes per person to get into the tent. The first person who has to get in the tent is Don. He's our paramedic. We need to start getting the injectables into this guy. So Don goes in first. 10 minutes later, we could send Libor in. Then 10 minutes later, Bruce can go in. So I have a half an hour of standing outside the tent at 20 below zero, and I go and visit the other teams. I go to the Koreans. How are you guys doing? Oh, we're proud. We've got some people to the summit. Yeah, it was a little bit of an inconvenience that Nemo lost his life. Right? Go to the Russians, they're okay. We go to the Italians, say, Daniele, what the hell's going on with your team? And all of our tents are, in a very small area. And so I'm like, he goes, I don't know, Chris, they don't know what's happening to them. I have not heard from them all day. So we look up the mountain and we could see their lights together. We know that they are within 3 hours from returning to camp. It's 9:30 now. If they're not back by 12 o'clock, yell for help and we will go out and rescue them. That's the plan at 9:30. At 11, Mario calls in asking for directions back to the tent. The wind has picked up. There's a storm forecast for tomorrow. He cannot find his footprints. And so Daniele gives him directions. He crawls into the tent at 1 o'clock in the morning. Where is Stefano? He's 5 minutes behind me. You're tired, Daniele. I'm tired. Michele, who's been laying here in the sleeping bag all day long, is also tired. Let's go to sleep. And they fall asleep. Stefano never returns to the tent. 7 o'clock in the morning, it is a raging blizzard at Camp 4. People are screaming and hollering. The Russians and the Portuguese climbers and the Korean climbers all team up and they head off the side of the mountain. We are stuck in the tent with this whacked out Czech dude who looks like he's finishing up his opium binge, and he is suffering from so much anxiety from the swelling of his brain that he can't speak English anymore. He can't do any basic function. He can't open a zipper, close a zipper. We're helping him pee in a bottle. We're trying to feed him some water. We know we have to take him down with us. Again, we don't know where his team is. We can't just let him wander in the snowstorm on his own. And so we're trying to get everybody ready. Inside the vestibule of our tent the night before, just like we had done every other day in the expedition, we had stacked our crampons, one pair atop the other pair atop the other pair, right? Submarine discipline on these kinds of expeditions. When we wake up in the morning, the top pair of crampons has been stolen. Somebody from another tent, another team, had left their crampons outside. 10 inches of snow has fallen in a couple of hours. Unable to find their crampons, they steal our crampons. So now one of us has to descend without crampons. The choice is made that Bruce and myself will lower Libor down by a rope, and Don will go down without crampons. Not a big deal as long as you don't hit a patch of ice. As we're making all these plans, etc., the Italians start screaming at us. And they're yelling, you have to come down now. If you don't come down now, you will die just like Stefano. And it's at 8:30 in the morning, we find out for the first time that Stefano Zafka has never come back down. We look at each other, what should we do? Should we go look for him in this blizzard at 8,000 meters? If we do that, we know that we are leaving Libor alone, and he will not survive alone. We also have these 3 screaming Italians and the Iranian climber that are begging us to lead them down. They can't find their way in the blizzard. And so we realized it's better to save 5 people's lives than try to save 1 person. And chances are Stefano has sat down and froze to death like they do on Everest, or he's walked off the side of K2 like Nima Nuber Sherpa shot off the side earlier in the day. So we start to head down. In the blizzard, Don steps on a patch of ice. His feet go shooting out from underneath him. He goes tumbling down, and by a miracle, he lands at Camp 3, but he can't stand up because he's broken his leg. Right? We have the resources to get a man with a broken leg down. We have the 3 Italians and the Iranian and Bruce. I will stay at Camp 3 with the Czech climber who is unable to move any further. So in the blizzard, the 5 of these people start to head down, 5 or 6 of them, and Don is obviously in a lot of pain. It is an inconvenience to wait for somebody who has a broken leg in a blizzard, so the Italians and the Iranian leave him. They get down to Camp 2. They're tent at Camp 2. Somebody had forgotten to shut the zipper, and the tent is filled with snow, but our tent is there. So 4 of them climb into a 3-person tent. There's a spare sleeping bag in there, so we had told Don, abandon your sleeping bag at Camp 3. You can't carry the weight. So Don crawls to the tent at 8 o'clock at night. He unzips the vestibule door. He's trying to unzip the main door of the tent, and he looks inside, and it's full. And there's Mario inside Don's sleeping bag, surrounding packages of food. They've eaten our food during the day, and they won't let Don in the tent because there's no room. Well, where am I going to sleep? You could sleep in the vestibule. It's like, can I at least have my sleeping bag? And Mario looks at him and says, you know what, Don? Yesterday this was your sleeping bag, and tomorrow this will be your sleeping bag, but today this is my sleeping bag. And he won't give a man with a broken leg his own sleeping bag. Bruce is forced to climb into the destroyed Italian tent to survive the night. We all somehow make it through the night. We make it back down to Advanced Base Camp. We bring in a helicopter to haul out the wounded. After the wounded are gone, it's time to have a little conversation with some Italian men. So I go over to the tent. They look great. Their hairs are combed. Like, would you like a cup of espresso? Hell yeah, I want a frickin' espresso. And so I have an espresso, and I start getting into it with them. And it is a screaming match, right? I need to know why they abandoned Stefano Zafka, why they left him up there to die. And in the middle of this screaming match, in walks the Iranian climber, who looks at me and he's wagging his finger. And he goes, I have a question for you. I'm like, okay, what is it? He goes, why is it when everybody else was up there for themselves, why was it that your team was up there for everybody else? And I was like, dude, don't reach the peak but miss the point, right? What is the point of all this? Like, isn't it to become a better version of yourselves? Well, this expedition, for me at least, unfolds with a great sense of pride. Mainly because we had 3 goals and we reached all of them. Number 1 was we wanted to reach the summit. Number 2 was we wanted to reach the summit together. We knew that if we reached the summit together, our chance of coming home alive were greater. And our 3rd goal was to climb the mountain in a style that we would be proud of forever. And I think we achieved that. I was the last person to walk off of K2 that season. I went to every single tent I passed on the way down to make sure nobody was left behind. We were done letting people die on K2. We wanted to make sure we brought them all home alive. Sadly, we lost 2 that year. Well, I have just been speaking a little bit too much on some things. We're going to race through the next section, and you guys are going to have to forgive me. I did go back to Italy because to interview Daniele Nardi, but I went there for one reason. When they got back to Italy, we found out from Stefano Zafka's family that of the 8 people on the expedition, the camera guys, the base camp, etc., only 2 of them came to the Zafka family house. And they only spent 15 minutes with the Zafka family. These boys had been with Stefano Zafka for the last 8 weeks of his life, but they only had, whatever shame, guilt, or whatever, they only could show up, 2 of them, for 15 minutes to spend with the family. I was so angry, I flew to Rome, rented a car, went to the town, and I spent 8 hours with the family, going through Facebook posts, emails, looking at the film. They could see from the film that their son made a terrible mistake, right? Just helping them try to grieve. And then I went down to Daniele Nardi's house to have a little bit of a conversation. And Daniele, in pure Daniele fashion, said well, Chris, it's every man for himself above 8,000 meters. And I was like, oh yeah? If that was the case, we would have left your ass at high camp, because that's above 8,000 meters, and we're the ones who dragged your ass down. We we guided you back to Camp 3 so you get to Camp 2, etc. Anyway, these kinds of people are all over the world. Has anybody ever met somebody who's like a Daniele Nardi? Yeah. Has anybody ever worked for somebody who's like a Daniele Nardi? Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. We do know that we judge people all the time. Sadly, our judgment systems are terrible. Do you know that every 13 seconds in the United States is a divorce? 50% of all first marriages end in divorce, 66% of all second marriages, 75% of all third marriages end in divorce. We are terrible at choosing partners, right? So do you know that people who go and work out get paid 9% more than their friends who don't? Do you know that women who wear makeup can be paid up to 20% more than women who don't wear makeup, right? For every inch you're taller than average, you make more money than everybody else. Our judgment systems in America are totally screwed up, right? It's all based on how great you are, like there's the attractiveness factor, right? So how sexy you are pays really well. And then how many big animals you kill pay really well. Have anybody been in business where you are bonused or commissioned on the work that you do? So the person who kills the biggest animal gets paid the most? Okay, in a real team, in high performance teams, we judge people based on two axes here. Do you produce strategic results, and are you aligned with my core values? So let's think about Daniele Nardi's team for a second. 3 of 4 people reached the summit, so 75% summit success, right? So they produced some strategic results on this axis, right? Maybe 75. Where would you guys rate the issue of the fact that one guy dies? Pretty bad. What would you say?
Pretty bad.
Yeah, pretty bad, yeah. So if you were rating all those teams up there, right, and you had to say, okay, is it more important that they produce strategic results or that they were aligned with my core values? Which one would you put the most money on? Which would you weight higher? Core values? How many of you have worked with somebody who is aligned with your core values but doesn't produce a lot of strategic results? Right? All of us, right? Is it easier to fire this person or to fire this person? If you think lower yellow is easy to fire, raise your hand. Okay? How about people who think that upper yellow is easier to fire? Yeah. In general, most people will say upper yellow, right? Because they can't stand this person, but they love this person. If I fire this person, they won't be able to pay for their kids' soccer lessons or whatever it is, right? So we keep these people around. Our job in every team, though, is to build this team. People are aligned with our core values and they deliver strategic results. How many of you have worked for a team that does that or has done that? These teams are amazing. These teams make a lot of money, right? These teams are fun to work for. These are the teams where you improve your career, right? So these are the teams that obviously the CMC is trying to build. Every time you go on a trip, you're trying to build this kind of thing. I know Chris leads all these trips. He's going to talk about this later. It is so important that you outline what your core values so that people can be aligned to them. Okay. Daniele Nardi, we do know that he had all of the right tools and techniques. I mean, this is the best dressed man on the mountain, right? He was obviously super fast, right? But as a leader, he was really a sociopath, right? He had middle management, right? He had Mario right here, and then he had a couple of low-level employees, certainly Stefano, etc. So this is the way a lot of teams are built, right? Some kind of sociopathic leader who he needs these people, right? Because they do all the work, and then the more the company grows, to tell you the truth, this group here grows bigger because this is insulation between the people with the pitchforks and the sociopath. So we do know that Daniele had all the right tools and the techniques to get the result he wanted, which was to be the one and only person to reach the summit of K2, right? And from research that's done by the guys at Harvard, they know that if you have the right tools and the right techniques, that predicts your future success by 25%. The other 75% is actually your behaviors that you bring to the task at hand. And as those of us who are leaders know, what we're trying to get out of people all the time is the right behaviors, because all of our competitors also have laptops. They also have the same software system, right? We all have the same financial techniques, etc. The difference between our company and the other company is the behaviors of our team, and this is how we get discretionary energy out of people, by making sure that we all have the right core value alignment. So Daniele Nardi's behaviors are dangerous, unproductive, and dysfunctional. And we know from research on people like Daniele that these teams do terribly in the long run, right? 30 to 40% worse than teams with no duds. And if you have a dud team member on your team, you guys know this. They hold your team hostage. They actually think that they are better than everybody else. Without them, the company is going to fail. And so what ends up happening is when all this discretionary energy of the company is going to, taking care of these gigantic crybabies, all of the good people want to leave your company and go somewhere else. So all you're doing is taking your best people and encouraging them to go work for your competitors if you leave that person behind, right? They lose performance because they're spending all the time dealing with these petty dramas. And lastly, this is the problem in America. 73% of your managers don't know how to deal with these people. And this is our challenge, is teaching future leaders first how to deal with the duds, right? So they can put all the discretionary energy towards the people that really matter, those greens up there. So that's the organization that you guys are part of. This is the organization you have to protect. Save the greens at all cost, right? Give all of your time and energy to these people and the least amount of time and energy to everybody else. So let me ask you a question. How many of you have ever seen a green become a yellow? Like you hired somebody and they were amazing, and then all of a sudden something happens at the workplace and they become dysfunctional over time, right? Probably all of us. Sometimes it's because their dog died, or their girlfriend breaks up with them, or their car breaks down. And sometimes it's because we make them dysfunctional. There are 6 psychological needs that every member of a team has. If you don't meet their 6 psychological needs, you will take a high-functioning person and make them dysfunctional. Just so you guys know, we have a workbook for you, so you guys either some of you guys grabbed the hard copy, but they have PDF versions, so this stuff is in there. But these are the 6 psychological needs. Now, Chris, who leads a lot of trips, and all of you guys who do, have you ever had somebody who was an outlier that didn't feel like they belonged as a member of the team? They're isolated by some reason. It's our job to make them feel like they belong. We have to reorganize the team so that person goes from the outside to the inside. And if we don't do it, as Chris I'm sure has experienced, these people can cause the whole team to fail because you failed to bring them into the inner circle, right? What about stuff like autonomy? Has anybody here ever worked for somebody who was a micromanager? Yeah. Has anybody been a micromanager? I know I have in the past, right? It took me a long time to get out of that. You know what? People hate micromanagers, right? They have to have autonomy. They have to have the freedom to make mistakes, etc. So there's 6 psychological needs that everybody has. If you want your team to be high performing, you have to make sure that you deliver on all 6 of those needs. You literally have to judge yourself at the end of the week on how well you treated, Janie with respect, recognition, belonging. Does she understand the meaning, how the purpose behind the organization, how the work that she does makes a difference for other people? If I would teach anything to young leaders, it would be these 6 words, right? And make sure that you make this part of your daily practice. Because if you don't, you will take great people and make them dysfunctional. You will end up having to fire them, right? Because you actually didn't do your job of meeting their 6 psychological needs. Okay, I'm going to go through some of these real quick. I said this earlier in the day. Right? According to Gallup, only 10% of people are naturally born leaders, 8% have the raw material to be turned into good leaders, but 82% of all leaders stink. The problem with this is the good leaders actually have happy employees who are productive, that everybody sticks around, the customers love them, and they're much more profitable. So that's what we're shooting for. You can leave the spot off of me for the rest of this thing here. So high performance teams, this is what I studied, right? I was at Wharton for 16 years focused just on this issue. And we know that, their superior performance, right? They do better than their peers in every objective, that they make a distinctive impact. Like if you think about the CMC, if the CMC went away, would Colorado's outdoor community be worse off for you guys disappearing? And I'm sure the answer is yes. Obviously, at 108 years old, you guys know how to endure. So what makes a high-performance team special is they're motivated by their mission, they're united by their values, and they're proud of their reputation. So I'm going to go through this stuff really quick because this is the important stuff. Okay, you guys have a mission statement. The best missions answer this question. Why does the world need your organization to succeed? And here are some examples that are out there. So if we look at Dow Chemical, you might not like Dow Chemical, but they have a great mission statement because they're trying to improve what is essential to human progress by mastering science and technology. You know what? I'm a human, right? I want to progress. I need somebody that's going to master science and technology to help me out. What about ConocoPhillips, right? They're pioneering spirit to responsibly deliver energy to the world. I need energy. I can't get to the mountains if my truck doesn't have gas, right? Or Under Armour. I'm an athlete. I would love it if someone put their passion in science and their relentless pursuit of innovation to better me as an athlete. Well, it needs to be clear, it needs to matter in order for people to give a damn. This is your mission statement. On the survey, we asked you if this was motivating to you. And tell me, is anybody good at data? What do you see here? Someone with a loud voice, tell us what they see. It's all over the place, yeah. Luckily, you have, you're motivated by it, right? But you have people that are over here that are they're not motivated by it. I know that this organization is 108 years old. I think your mission is actually, when you go back to it, what you really see is this is what we do, not why we do it, right? What do, right? We unite people, we collect and disseminate information, we stimulate public interest, we encourage. It's not why we do it. Maybe just like Coca-Cola, which was invented around the same time as the Colorado Mountain Club, has changed their branding and slogans to address, the needs of a new generation of people. Maybe you guys want to look at that. Okay, all right. The second part of this is, are we united by our core values? This is critically important. We know that companies that have high alignment on core values have high employee satisfaction and have high productivity. So this is critical. Well, we have these big core values, and we ask you guys, how aligned are we on these core values? Does anybody see anything in this data? Better. Yeah, it's definitely better, right? Maybe for a bunch of reasons. Like one, it's simpler, right? So, yeah. Anyway, this is a good strength that you guys have. Obviously, the core values has to continue to be communicated for people because we need to move it this way, right? But we have a good, strong foundation. Okay, why does this matter? Those of you guys who are like psychology, geeks like me, you're going to love this. This is how we produce, greater self-efficacy in people, right? Self-efficacy is the ability that if I get knocked down, I can stand back up. If I fail on K2 the first time, I can come back to K2 the second time. When we align organizations around mission and core values, we have greater self-efficacy, which is exactly the gift we want to give our children. It's exactly the gift we want to give our employees. Teams that do this well, have a strong mission statement and strong core values, outperform their peers dramatically. So this is over a 15-year time period. The S&P 500 returned 118%. How many of you read Good to Great by Jim Collins, right? A climber from Boulder, right? Those companies went up 263%, but the firms of endearment, the ones that had a strong mission statement and strong alignment on core values, went up 1,700%, right? They make people money. So we also asked you guys how proud you are of your reputation as part of this whole thing. And, we got a pretty good, we're certainly proud to extremely proud, which is great. Okay. There's 4 things that every high-performance team leader is an expert at. And number 1 is they're an expert at communicating or really sharing their passion. So passion is critically important because there is nothing as contagious as emotions. And if you bring a positive emotional state to your team, everybody will become positive. How many of you guys have worked with cynical people before, or curmudgeons, right? Right? Can you imagine, that is a terrible way to have to go through work every day. So we need to bring the right emotional energy to our team. And passion could be low-key or it could be extremely, loud, but it still has to be positive energy. We know that emotional factors, as you see, are 4 times more effective as rational factors. So if I have a strong emotional bond with my company, my employees, I don't have to pay them as much, which, is a terrible thing to say. But anyway, right? Happiness, right? Happiness is critical for the success of any organization and any person, right? People who are happier make more, or are healthier, they make more money, they have better success over the course of their careers. And then we have cynics. The good thing about cynics is that they die early alone of a heart disease or dementia, right? And they are not competing with us for work or for raises. So, anyway, there's some silver lining to those cynics. So we asked you guys about passion in the organization. How much passion do you feel? I love my role, my colleagues, and am I excited about the challenges ahead? Am I just satisfied, or why am I still here? Now, we see this would be my challenge if I was the leader here. How do I get these people to become these people? What do I have to do to help them love what they do more, right? To bring more passion to the project so that we can elevate our productivity, our performance, whatever we want to do. Okay. One of the ways you do it is by constantly communicating with them. If people know where you're going, they will help you get there. If you don't know what I expect, how can I expect you to live up to my expectations? So again, Chris, you're leading, this trip. You're constantly telling people, hey, today's going to be hard, right? If we're going to have to dig a little bit deep, we're going to have to get up a little bit earlier, we're going to have to push ourselves a little bit harder, and they will do it if you prepare them for it. But if you don't tell them about it, and all of a sudden they come up against, a 3,000-foot elevation gain in a quarter mile, they're going to be totally pissed at you, right? The trick for all of us, in the real world is we live in a very dynamic environment. Constantly things are changing. So we have to communicate. And we have to be willing to change our destination based on the data that we see, right? Go back to 1996 on Everest. Those CEOs should have turned people around. The destination is no longer the summit. The destination is survival. But instead, they continued to go towards the summit. Why is this so important? It is the single most important thing that people say a leader has. That's the ability to be forward-looking. If you are not seen as being a visionary, you are not seen as being a leader, period. How many of you remember George H.W. Bush? You remember when he said, I don't do the vision thing, and then lost the election, right? It is so true. He was not, that one sentence, probably more than any other thing he ever said or did, doomed his second presidency. Okay, the data on this is terrible. Most organizations, nobody knows where the hell the organization is going. They don't know what the strategic plan is, right? They can't even tell you what any of the goals are. So people are not communicating very well within their organizations. We asked you guys about how well you knew where this place was going, and what do you think about this number? We got some people that are left out, right? But the vast majority of people know where we're headed. So you guys are starting to do, you're doing a good job. The message is getting out there to people. We just got to keep beating them over the heads until everybody gets it. Partnership. The two most important words in any relationship is trust and caring. How many of you have had your heart broken? Right? Hopefully you didn't break everybody else's heart, right? What happens with heartbreak is that you realize that the person that you're with is untrustworthy. They don't care about you anymore. And as a result of that, the relationship fails, right? Well, we have a huge trust problem in America, right? Not enough people trust their leadership, and as a result of this, not enough teams feel like they care about each other at the workplace, and then those teams do terribly. But teams that have high trust, right? Look, it's less stressful. They have more energy. They have fewer sick days. Everyone feels better about their work, right? Their clients love them. We have to invest constantly in trust and caring in our relationships to make them work. And this is a leader's responsibility. Okay, we asked this question. How much is there a feeling of trust and caring around here? And we have from we really trust and care about each other, allowing us to grow faster, to I wouldn't describe us as a team. So if we look at this data, there's some people that feel left out, right? When they look at it, remember, they have a sense of belonging. They don't feel like they belong. Other people want more. They think this organization can give them more trust and caring, right? And then we have some people over here that they're living in paradise. So either their needs are less, right? But what we need to do is we need to keep finding ways to increase the trust and caring, the sense of partnership that's so critical to this organization, especially since you guys are volunteer-based. And one of the ways we do this is by teaching people how to work hard, or work smart, not just hard. So how many of you guys work in an environment where you have regular team meetings? Good, because you know you make 20 to 25% more than your peers who don't. All the statistics are that if you don't stop and reflect, you will not learn, you will not improve. So we know that the 3 things that we have to focus on in every meeting is, did we bring the right tools to the job? Did we bring the right techniques? And most importantly, were our behaviors aligned with where the results we wanted to get? And a lot of times, the most important person to start this conversation is the leader who says, hey, yeah, we could have had a faster whatever, you know, could have done this a little bit differently, but you know what? I failed to bring us together in a way that allowed all of us to perform at our best, right? I didn't create an environment where the discretionary energy of everybody was allowed to move us all forward. So these 3 things have to be a part of every single one of those conversations. We asked you guys, are you guys just hardworking? Or are you working hard and smart? And what we got here is most people felt that we're working hard and are improving. So that means you have high expectations. You think the organization can go further. There's a couple of people who kind of feel like there's a bit of a mess that exists here, right? So we're not cleaning up our own messes, right? And then there's a very small group of people that, again, live in paradise. So there needs to be more events like this one. That is why you guys are all here right now, to bring the organization together, to help everybody reflect, to learn from each other, etc., so that you can move the organization forward. Well, that's our job, obviously, is to build this kind of an organization, right? Take the people that are here and move them this way, and don't let any people sneak into this section over here. And one of the ways that we can tell how good of a job we're doing is something called a Net Promoter Score. You guys familiar with this? So this is a question that's very simple. It's asked is, how likely are you to recommend this organization to a friend or family member? And what we got here is we got a total Net Promoter Score, of 63, which is super high. The worst you could be is negative 100. So, you know, it would be, you know, over time, this is a good number to watch to see if this goes up. And then it gives you an idea of how well you're doing on those other things. So, all right, everybody here's a leader. Everybody understands that they have to be viewed as passionate. They have to bring their positive emotion to every task, because our emotions are contagious. We have to communicate where we're going. When we tell people where they're going, they love to help us get there. Partnership. We have to really invest in trust and caring. You know, we have to let people know that we care about them, that we're trustworthy. And we have to help people learn to reflect upon their experiences so they can learn and be better prepared for the next big challenge. I know you guys all have the same dreams I have when we go in the mountains, right? We want to come home alive. We want to get to the summit, and we want to climb the mountain in a style that we'd be proud of. Right? That is an amazing legacy to leave to other people. I wish you guys the most amount of luck imaginable in your future adventures, especially your leadership adventures. It's a hell of a lot harder, obviously, leading a team than it is, you know, summiting K2. So hats off to all of you. Thank you very much. Yep, you're welcome.